Tonight, Governor Greg Abbott is reassuring Texans following a targeted attack on a pair of Minnesota lawmakers.
They will work to ensure that not just members of the legislature, but candidly anybody in the public is going to be free from some type of deranged attack like that.
How the state is planning to strengthen security. Plus, what's contributing to this rise in political violence.
If you dehumanize your opponents, then any way that you deal with them becomes, acceptable.
And later, we're turning to the 2026 elections. Which seats are up for grabs? And could Democrats finally win a statewide race? Capitol Tonight starts right now. Good evening, and thanks for joining us here on Capitol Tonight. I'm James Barragan. We begin tonight with new details on the Minnesota shooting that left one lawmaker dead and another injured. Texas Congresswoman Veronica Escobar says she was one of the lawmakers on the suspected shooter's target list. This is part of the statement posted on social media explaining that she learned she was a target on Sunday morning. She went on to say, quote, "Politically motivated violence and violence of any kind have no place in our democracy, and we all have a role to play in moving our country toward healing." Police have arrested the man suspected of carrying out the attacks. Federal investigators say the suspect intended to inflict more harm on his targets before he was found by police on Sunday night. The attacks had law enforcement across the nation on the lookout for potential copycat attacks, including here in Texas. The Department of Public Safety evacuated the Capitol Saturday morning after what they called a credible threat against lawmakers. Later that evening, authorities arrested a suspect during a traffic stop in LaGrange, which is in between Houston and Austin. The suspect, who authorities have not identified, told officials he had a handgun in the car and was arrested for speeding. No charges have been filed against the person. DPS said the investigation is ongoing. Governor Greg Abbott says the state is taking these threats very seriously. And as our Rena Diamante explains, the Department of Public Safety is now on an elevated alert level.
We want to make sure that public service, our democracy can survive in an environment where public service doesn't become a death sentence.
State Representative Mihaela Plisa of North Texas says this kind of political violence is exactly why her family members fled Eastern Europe. Texas State Police made an arrest in connection with credible threats made against Texas lawmakers who plan to attend Saturday's rally at the state capitol protesting President Donald Trump's policies. The revelation prompted Plisa and other members of the Texas Democratic Caucus to send a letter to Republican Governor Greg Abbott and the director of the Department of Public Safety asking what steps are being taken to protect state lawmakers and monitor extremism.
When our leaders casually talk about fighting their opponents, painting them as enemies of the state, these words, they just don't disappear into thin air. They land in the ears of unstable extremists, individuals who are willing to act upon them. And they don't just affect the state representative, they affect our families, they affect our staff.
After a bill signing Monday, Governor Abbott said the person arrested intended to do harm to legislators and that DPS is now on heightened alert all across the state.
They're very effective at it, and they will work to ensure that not just members of the legislature, but candidly anybody in the public is going to be free from some type of deranged attack like that.
The arrest in Texas follows the shooting deaths of a Minnesota state representative and her husband and what officials describe as a politically motivated assassination. The gunman allegedly also wounded a state senator and his wife.
We should make sure that every single person is kept safe, no matter their political party, no matter their political affiliation. Look, I'm proudly a progressive Democrat, but I care deeply about the safety of my Republican colleagues.
Members of Congress have been facing an increasing number of threats against them. Congressman Greg Casar said a virtual emergency meeting with members of Congress was planned to discuss how to improve security protocols. In Washington, Rena Diamante, Capitol Tonight.
In Washington, the U.S. Capitol Police are tracking the surge in threats against members of Congress, their family, and staff. In 2024, there were more than 9,400 such threats. That's up from more than 8,000 in 2023 and more than 7,500 in 2022. Democratic leaders in Congress say they plan to speak with the sergeant at arms and head of Capitol Police to discuss safety measures.
It's not sustainable that members of Congress, perhaps members of the judiciary, are being threatened and targeted simply for doing their jobs.
This is just the latest in a series of politically motivated attacks over the past year, including 2 assassination attempts against President Donald Trump. For more on the rise of political threats, we have professor and filmmaker Paul Steckler from the University of Texas. Thanks for joining us, Professor.
Glad to be here.
You've produced a handful of projects on Texas politics and the political divide. What do you think are the primary factors driving what we are seeing in this increase in political rhetoric and political violence in the United States?
Well, I think the rise of social media and the fact that you can say almost anything and have a wide audience. And, I think also our politics and our politics discourse is becoming more and more negative. It's becoming a little bit more mean-spirited. It's easy to dehumanize your opponents. And if you dehumanize your opponents, then any way that you deal with them becomes, acceptable, so that in a world of rising social media, in a world of declining mainstream media, in a world where people are getting their information, increasingly from niche sources, I think it increases the divisions that we have in our country and also the decline in political discourse.
And you talked about social media, the rise in that, the dehumanization, the dehumanizing language that sometimes happens on those types of platforms. How does that contribute to the risk of violence, and do you see a direct connection there?
Well, I think, if you think that your opponent isn't human, then doing violence towards them, it becomes more acceptable. I have no idea what the motivations were of the murderer or the alleged murderer in Minnesota, though we have some sort of an idea because of the hit list that he had, but I think that some people just, take it on themselves, for whatever their personal reasons are, to right the wrongs that they see in society. Why did people have a plot to try to kidnap the governor of Michigan, Governor Whitmer, a few years ago? Why did people think it was okay to storm the United States Capitol, back on January 6th? In what world is that acceptable? It's acceptable in a world where you think that you are saving your side, that the other side is, again, not acceptably human.
And Professor, is there a role for public officials or politicians, perhaps maybe institutions like law enforcement or even us in the media, to play here in trying to reduce the level of political rhetoric and political violence that we are seeing?
I believe there is. I think in the past, especially our presidents in times of, strife and in terms of division, have spoken out, against that, to be able to talk about the fact that we live in a democracy. We live in a democracy where we have the freedom of speech. We have the freedom of political assembly, and if our elected officials don't do that, then what kind of a message are they sending to, people, who are listening, who, respond to that kind of, let's say, decline in political discourse.
That is Paul Steckler, filmmaker and professor at the University of Texas. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Over the weekend, thousands of Texans showed up across the state to protest President Trump and his deportation policies. All the major cities saw protests, including Houston, Austin, San Antonio, and Fort Worth. But we also heard reports of dozens gathering in other regional hubs like Odessa and McAllen. While the focus of the protest was on the president, many of the signs referenced the administration's immigration policies. In response to the protest, the president is making some changes. He's directing immigration officials to pull back on deporting farm and restaurant workers while ramping up immigration enforcement in Democratic-run cities. Our Taylor Populars explains.
As he meets with world leaders at the G7 summit in Canada, President Donald Trump is redirecting how his administration carries out deportations here at home. The president posted Sunday night that we must expand efforts to detain and deport illegal aliens in America's largest cities, such as Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York. He did not mention Republican-run states with large illegal migrant populations like Texas or Florida.
I want them to focus on the cities, because the cities are where you really have what's called sanctuary cities, and that's where the people are.
This follows the president signaling a willingness to ease immigration enforcement actions on farms and in restaurants and hotels, sectors that rely in part on workers who are undocumented. He posted on social media last week that our great farmers and people in the hotel and leisure business have been stating that our very aggressive policy on immigration is taking very good long-time workers away from them, with those jobs being almost impossible to replace. Changes are coming. In a congressional hearing the day before, Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins said she had spoken with the president about scaling back some enforcement.
There is a recognition that there has to be a balance. He remains committed to ensuring that no laws are broken, but while realizing that our agriculture community, specifically our dairy farmers, a lot of our row croppers, our specialty crops, there is a massive labor issue that we have to work to solve in partnership with Congress.
Rollins posted Sunday that she and the president are putting farmers first, and that severe disruptions to our food supply would harm Americans. Rural voters also supported the president overwhelmingly in the last election. One analyst says this represents a potential moment of realization for the president that immigration policy is intertwined with the role immigrants play in our daily lives.
The president was finally reminded that a large section of our economy, especially in agriculture, in construction, in hotels, hospitality in general, is reliant on immigrant workers, and many of them are unauthorized, and many of them have been here for long periods of time, so employers had relied on them.
California Governor Gavin Newsom, who has taken the president to court for deploying Marines and National Guard troops to Los Angeles, said Monday that the president wants to incite violence and chaos in blue states. Newsom wrote on social media, "It's illegal and we will not let it stand." Reporting at the White House, Taylor Populars, Spectrum News.
Still to come on Capitol Tonight, Beto O'Rourke and Colin Allred are both eyeing another Democratic run for Senate. Why our political analyst says an Austin state representative could steal their thunder. Plus, as world leaders meet in Canada, all eyes are on Trump's reaction to the growing conflict between Israel and Iran. Now let's take a look at some of the top headlines across the state in today's Political Minute. Governor Greg Abbott was in Denton celebrating the passage of his priority property tax cut legislation. Lawmakers approved growing the state's homestead exemption to $140,000 and $200,000 for Texans over 65. That amounts up to about $51 billion the state is spending on buying down property taxes, which Abbott said is the most by any state. Voters still have to approve those changes in a November election. The Republican Party of Texas is reaffirming its decision to close its primaries. Texas currently has open primaries and voters do not have to register with a party. But last year, the Texas GOP's executive committee voted to close primaries to ensure that only Republicans could participate. Over the weekend, they held a similar vote to clarify and solidify the party's desire to close its primary. Some critics have said such a change could invite legal challenges. A new investigation by the Texas Tribune reveals that El Paso has become the deadliest border sector for migrants since the city joined Governor Abbott's Operation Lone Star. Historically, the El Paso sector had among the fewest migrant deaths across the southern border. But by 2024, El Paso had become the deadliest sector for migrants to cross the border. From January 2023 to August 2024, nearly 300 remains were reported in that sector, according to an analysis by the news outlet. It's Monday night, which means Harvey Kronberg is back in the Capitol Tonight studio for his analysis. Harvey, thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
So the Republicans see South Texas as fertile ground, and Punchbowl News is reporting that it could be a crowded GOP primary. They're throwing out Webb County Judge Tano Tijerina, State Representative Ryan Guillen, which is a new one that I hadn't heard. Former Congresswoman Myra Flores has made it official, and I think Jay Furman also has made it official. How do you see that primary unfolding against potentially a challenger for Democrat Henry Cuellar?
Well, it may be that I know Guillen the best of the group, but I would think he's been in office so long, he's probably got one of the best networks out there, and South Texas networks really count. But I'm not sure it's going to be as fertile ground for Republicans this cycle as it was last cycle, simply because there is some buyer's remorse, both nationally and certainly in the Hispanic community, having supported Donald Trump. I don't know if that translates into this next election or not. It's obviously too early to tell, but the forced deportations is certainly just say left a bad taste in a lot of folks that thought they were Trump supporters.
And speaking of knowing the South Texas networks, Henry Cuellar is stiff competition, and he's cozied up to the president quite
Absolutely.
a bit.
Yep. He is the conservative Democrat.
There you go. In South Texas, another South Texas race, we saw Susan Story Rubio, a Cotulla rancher, saying she's going to challenge Tony Gonzalez in Texas 23. How do you handicap her chances, and does that help Democrats at all?
Well, Gonzalez has established himself as kind of a bridge, I think, between MAGA and conventional Republicans. That area out there, it's pretty much of a swing district, and I suspect that historically, using El Paso as a baseline, if you have somebody that's too conservative running, they're going to get beat by a Democrat. And my suspicion is that Gonzalez is the right fit, that somebody who wants to call for additional mass deportations is probably not in tune with that district.
We'll have to see on that. With Ken Paxton leaving the Attorney General's office to run for U.S. Senate, we're seeing more people join that race. Aaron Wrights just announced last week. Do you see more Republicans joining that race? And is this an opportunity, if there are so many Republicans beating up on each other, for Democrats to kind of sneak in?
Well, the only other name that I'm hearing is Mitch Little, obviously, and he would have some money because of both. He distinguished himself, frankly, in this last session, and his role in defending Ken Paxton. But other than that, I'm not really hearing. Mays Middleton has so much money, so much personal wealth that before anybody else is going to get in. Brian Hughes, for instance, was looking at it, but I think that he is decided.
$10 million will scare you off.
Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, statewide, that's just the beginning of the race, but it is a primary. And yes, it does create openings for Democrats. I think that it's going to be a good year for Democrats anyway, maybe not statewide, but you've got some organization on the ground. They're obviously rethinking how they're messaging, and generally we've leaned so far right in Texas that we're out of the mainstream, and eventually the mainstream does reassert itself.
Well, let's keep on the subject of contested primaries, because we've seen Beto O'Rourke say he's maybe interested in another run for U.S. Senate. We also heard this weekend Colin Allred, former Dallas congressman, saying on various news programs that he's considering it and will be making a decision soon. James Tallarico, state representative from Austin, has also talked about it. You have mentioned Joaquin Castro as a potential run. Is a contested primary a good thing for Democrats?
Yes, I think so, especially in that race. And I would say that both Allred and Beto O'Rourke ran softball campaigns, and you're not going to win in Texas with a softball campaign against a Republican. You got to be able to punch in the face exactly the same way they punch back, and taking the high road is pointless, frankly. Tallarico, interestingly, has been very combative. Of the three, he's really kind of personally the gentlest, but and he's become the voice of the Democratic caucus on so many issues here, and he is one of the most articulate members. So I think it would be a very interesting. I don't think there's a presumptive winner in any of this.
And final question on the marquee race. We keep talking about Senator Cornyn versus Attorney General Paxton, but there's this lingering rumor about Congressman Wesley Hunt and whether he's going to join that race. How much more time does he have to make a decision?
Well, it depends on the president. I think I've mentioned on the show before that Hunt was in consideration for a follow-up candidate for Secretary of Defense if Hexeth wasn't able to get across the finish line. The president seems to like him, and if President Trump were to make an endorsement or even acknowledge him, it would skyrocket his support inside Republican circles. And I think he kind of likes this role of being the dark horse that everybody has to talk about because he changes the dynamics of the race pretty dramatically.
That is Harvey Kronberg. Thanks so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
Still to come on Capitol Tonight. The conflict between Israel and Iran escalates as the two nations exchange missile strikes. Can President Trump bring Iran to the table for peace talks? Welcome back. As President Donald Trump meets with world leaders in Canada for the G7 summit, a central focus is the expanding conflict between Israel and Iran. Our Evan Kosloff has more.
Dramatic video shows the moment Iran's state television channel was attacked by the Israeli military. The strike interrupting a live broadcast. Israel's defense minister calling this an attack on Iran's, quote, propaganda and incitement broadcasting authority, saying they will, quote, strike the Iranian dictator everywhere. Since Friday, Israel has widened its attacks against Iran. The Israeli military saying it destroyed roughly a third of Iran's missile launchers, giving it air superiority. Israel now warning hundreds of thousands in Iran's capital to evacuate, saying more strikes are on the way.
Our objective is to remove the Iranian nuclear program, which includes with it a massive missile program.
Iran has also sent a barrage of missiles into Israel, killing at least 8 people Monday morning. Iran also striking an Israeli oil refinery and damaging the power grid. This escalating conflict looming over the gathering of world leaders at the G7 summit.
We've always supported Israel.
While meeting with Canada's Prime Minister, President Donald Trump repeated his calls for Iran to come to the table to negotiate a nuclear deal.
They have to make a deal, and it's painful for both parties, but I'd say Iran is not winning this war, and they should talk, and they should talk immediately before it's too late.
And this Middle East conflict is, of course, not the only focus of this summit. In fact, President Trump said his primary focus is on trade. The president also weighing in on the Russia-Ukraine war, saying that it was a mistake back in 2014 to kick Russia out of what was then called the G8 after its invasion of the Crimean Peninsula in Ukraine. For now, reporting here in Washington, I'm Evan Kosloff, Spectrum News.
That's going to do it for this edition of Capitol Tonight. Join us again tomorrow for the latest in Texas politics. Thanks, and have a great night.
Thank you for watching our YouTube channel. Let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, and click the subscribe button right here. You can also download our app or watch us on TV to learn more about the candidates, where they stand on the issues, and more. We'll see you then.